So it was. Give me 1 second to look this up because I wanted to make sure I'm saying the right thing.
Yeah, Shane's got something on his mind.
Am I correct in thinking that Josh Hawley posted his address?
He did.
on
did,
the internet.
Fact. He did. And 3 days ago.
It's still up.
Dude, what's funny too is that he posted he's posting. I guess I don't even know what the full story is. It's something about he posted some court documentation about supposedly the Antifa that attacked him in his home or something like that. Yeah. But in the documents that he published, it shows one that the charges were dismissed against that person on the 16th of August, and two, it has his full home address on there where the incident happened. And you would think, yeah. I mean, just if he's piss poor OPSEC, if he's really concerned about Antifa,
right, or people harassing him,
yeah, it's been up for 3 days, man.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
We won't say the address, but it has been up for 3 days.
You could easily find it, assuming it will still be up there. Yeah.
I want to see how much this house goes for. Let's look on Zillow.
Chris Cillizza,
just out of curiosity,
several months back posted he was posting I don't even remember what the point of the tweet was, but he posted the front cover of one of his children's magazines that I guess that they have a subscription for, and of course in the corner of the magazine on the cover, because it was mailed to them, it had their full home address on it.
What a fucking golden retriever.
I mean, I've also done that, but I've never claimed to not be stupid. So it's one thing if I do it.
Josh Hawley's house is worth $1.6 million, which is but again, it doesn't particularly look like an impressive house from the front, but it is fucking Northern Virginia, so of course it's fucking insanely inflated. No, it's just Jesus Christ, I can't even imagine living in that suburban hell. Again, having not grown up in suburbs is just a terrifying thought to me. But anyway, again, fucking this whole specter of Antifa bullshit, especially from fucking, just God, he is a contemptible creature. Mm-hmm. Just looking at the guy's smile that he has in his avatar on Twitter, his profile picture. What just an absolute fucking worm. Fuck you. Anyway, guys, we should get going because I got a long drive ahead of me tonight to Northern Virginia. So,
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off his death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Hi.
We've got Chris.
Hello.
Shane, what do we got?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about this guy, William Regnery II, who you may have encountered or heard of before, and if you had, you're probably in a similar situation as me, where I really just heard out about him because he died about a month back. And, there were a lot of kind of recaps and discussions about his life and his legacy. Essentially a withering, aging, old millionaire Nazi who bankrolled much of the contemporary extreme right, and is just one of many, I would say, who are kind of responsible for this legacy that we're continuing to deal with as a society. And I think this is an interesting guy to talk about for a number of reasons, as sort of a focal point for talking about this in general. And one of the main ones is that, when the Trump movement started, there was this kind of continual outroar from a lot of the centrist and liberal press, and to a weird extent, you'd think after 5-6 years now of like living with this as a reality, as like a real political force in this country, there that it would be gone, but to a large extent it hasn't, right? Like there's still this weird sense that like this is an aberration, this came out of nowhere, right? How did suddenly racism, leap into the mainstream? And the reality is that, like, I mean, first of all, obviously the country is very deeply racist. It is to its core. It has been since its founding. But in particular, when you're talking about like an explicit extremist faction, right, that seeks to undermine whatever the social fabric and institute some kind of like Nazi program or whatever, that too is not like a mere aberration. That is a deliberate plan by a number of people, and in this case, what we're talking about is like, where does the money come from? How do these foundations and things, get off their feet? How do they get sustained? How do people get publishing like racist pseudoscience and stuff? And again, there's a number of people and a number of organizations to look at, but this particular guy, William Regnery II, and I would argue maybe also his entire like family, kind of leading up to it, is like has been a fixture in American politics now. But yeah, this guy is a real sicko. He's a real weird old freak, and now he's dead. And I think it would be interesting to get into it a little bit and talk about how he comes from money, where that comes from, and what he's done with it. So Dwight, maybe you can kick us off and talk a little bit about his background.
Yeah, happy to. And again, like, as you alluded to as well, like, details about the guy are actually quite scant by design. I think, he just really didn't want to be in the limelight, and he felt that most of his role was being in the background. But also, he came from this legacy of wealth, and also very much let's just say a strong ideology, and you'll understand in 1 second where I'm going to read here just from two different things quickly. One is just a few sentences from the Southern Poverty Law Center under their extremist files on William Regnery. And so they just wrote here, for 3 generations, William H. Regnery II's family has been a force in right-wing politics. And I love this. His grandfather, William Regnery, was a founding member of the America First Committee.
And what was that? What was that, Dwayne?
Well, Chris, I'm super glad that you asked, because I've got an answer for you. Dedicated to maintaining American neutrality towards Nazi Germany. I'm not a history buff, but at that kind of time in the early 20th century, it was definitely a strong thing to put your foot down about.
Well, luckily, that's such a tarnished reputation
no one would ever
for
use
that slogan. Nobody would ever use the America First.
Exactly. Again, especially to resurrect it at a time where fascism and strong men across the world are taking power and et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't seem suspicious to me at all. It continues here. It says his cousin Al Regnery is a former president of Regnery Publishing, as well as a former official in the United States Department of Justice under Ronald Reagan, which I'm sure that was fine. And so I'm just going to read here just kind of like a more of a narrative article from BuzzFeed, in fact, where they talk. It's an article which we're probably going to cite several times during this episode by BuzzFeed News, called "The Money Man Behind the Alt-Right." Yeah, so just kind of continuing on we were talking about here about his grandfather, William Regnery. It says, 77 years ago, America First had another distinctive meaning. It was the name of the organization formed to prevent the U.S. from entering World War II and battling the Nazis. One of the America First Committee's chief financiers was Regnery's grandfather and namesake, the first William Regnery, who was born on a farm in Iowa and became a textile magnate, banker, and philanthropist in Chicago, which to me seems like quite a leap. I think they're maybe omitting a little bit of familiar history there. But the face of the original America First movement was Charles Lindbergh, better known for making the first solo nonstop flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927, but who earned a reputation as an anti-Semite. Our bond with Europe is a bond of race and not of political ideology, he said in a 1941 address. Very interesting that was 1941. It says here, there are no published writings by the elder William Regnery, and little record to know why he financed the America First Committee. I'm just going to guess because he's a raging fucking racist. But Bill Regnery, who we're talking about here, is short for William, who was born in February 1941, said he has little memory of his grandfather, but Spencer, when they're talking about Richard Spencer, noted fucking racist and, neo-Nazi, told BuzzFeed News that the America First Committee is absolutely an intellectual and political forebear to today's alt-right. We'll leave that for now.
Really quick,
ahead,
too,
Shane.
just about the America First Committee. JFK and Gerald Ford, who were both later American presidents, gave them money.
Fucking amazing, man.
Just a little fun
Fucking
fact
amazing. There. Just great. Isn't that just great?
Mm.
So I found this to be valuable here, where they explain here. After the war, in 1947, Bill's uncle Henry launched what would become one of the longest-lasting and most influential conservative publishing houses in the country, Regnery Publishing, which went on to publish William F. Buckley and other pillars of the modern conservative movement.
Oh, yes.
And I have to read this one paragraph here, not just to explain, more of the background of it, but also to make a point. It says here, his uncle also published Human Events magazine, a journal that soon became one of the standard bearers for American conservatism. It says parenthetically here, it still exists online, where it provides a platform to the likes of the conservative provocateur Ann Coulter and the commentator and politician Pat Buchanan. Back then...
Anyone want to guess? Here, I'll maybe leave this one as... I'll leave the reveal for later, but let me get some guesses on the books here. Who is their current senior editor?
Ooh... All right, we're gonna reveal it later. Why don't we we'll do more guesses when we get to
we'll leave
point.
that one hanging
because I've got some thoughts. But okay.
Benny Johnson.
I wish, man. That's even better, but yeah, close.
It's not Harlan Hill, is it?
Okay, we got our guesses locked in.
All right.
Yeah, there it is.
Back then, it promoted ideas such as what Negroes and other low-income groups in the big cities require is work, not more abstract, quote, civil rights. Yikes. And that was in a 1965 essay arguing against raising the minimum wage to $1.75 per hour from $1 per hour. So again, it was against raising the minimum wage to $1.75 from $1. I should mention that accounting for inflation, $1 per hour, again, which they wanted to keep, is the equivalent in 2021 of $8.75 an hour, a whopping dollar more than our current minimum wage, federal minimum wage, which is pretty awesome, guys. That's progress. That's progress, right? I mean, here we are 50 years later. No. How many years later?
70.
1965?
60. Oh, 60.
Fuck.
65?
60 years later. And our minimum wage, comparatively adjusting for cost of living, is actually lower. Pretty awesome. Anyway, reading on here, it says a 1964 article about colonialism argued that, quote, the average African republic is about as well prepared for popular self-government as any kindergarten. It was titled, White Man Come Back. Yikes. Bill was weaned on this worldview. His father subscribed on his behalf to Human Events so he could read it at boarding school. Can you imagine that shit? So continuing here, I love this. He was Regnery went on to study political science at the University of Pennsylvania, where he joined a conservative students group called the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, sometimes known as ISI. And on its website, implying that it still exists, ISI says it was, quote, was there when the American conservative movement started 60 years ago, which is just funny to me, but, whatever you want to frame it. He was an impassioned conservative on campus. He was also clearly wealthy, one former friend remembers, and lived in his own large house in the Philly suburbs. He started a conservative... Can you fucking imagine that just for a second? I mean, I know it's an Ivy League university, so you have to imagine that kids, come from enormous wealth that are there or whatever. But can you imagine even just sequestering yourself from doing fucking, I don't know what the 1960s equivalent of keg stands were, shotgunning beers or whatever. Maybe it was just driving drunk and,
swallowing goldfish, flagpole sitting, I don't know.
I mean, it's a good observation, because I think like what this sets the tone for, right, is that even though he's the heir to this fortune, he comes out of this very moneyed, well-connected family. He ostracizes himself like continually over and over again, because like if you were like you were saying, right, like if you were going to an Ivy League and you were coming from that money at that time, you would be like hobnobbing it with the other sons of whatever, like horrible American dynasties to secure later positions in business. But instead he like, lives alone in a house and does like race science.
Exactly. Like he's the fucking weird kid.
Yeah.
That's just like, I will get my revenge on the usurpers.
Yeah.
All these psychos and sycophants that don't know what real friendship is.
Yeah.
I'm nearly actually directly quoting somebody that I grew up with.
He would be like, if he was like a young man nowadays, he would be like friend posting like Pepe memes and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Instead of
Bolsonaro friend.
Having the money to, probably go to like frat parties or be in a frat and do all of that, whatever ridiculous kind of uber rich bonding shit that goes on in those circles. Instead of that, he would be like, you'd be online, he'd be like on the chans, just like fucking hoarding all this money and wealth and not even taking advantage of that position in any way.
Yeah, he would have been like sitting posting on fucking R incel and shit like
yeah.
That's he would be in that thing, and unfortunately he had a lot of means, so well, here we are. Anyway, so it says fucking weirdo. He started a conservative student magazine called Analysis. Despite his,
Facts and Logic magazine.
Fucking idiot, man. What a fucking weirdo. It says, despite his wealth, however, Regnery never finished college. He said he was still a couple credits short of a degree, which, again, like, is what I would say, too. Like, if I fucking was just like, I can't fucking handle this. None of the people that I invited came over to my party. And I was sitting there humiliated, surrounded by beers and Prosecco. One reason he didn't graduate, he told BuzzFeed News, I don't know who he is. I think they're talking about maybe Richard Spencer. I don't think that Regnery talked to. Anyway, whatever.
No, he did. I'm
sorry.
And this particular piece that you're reading from, which is I think 2017. It was like one of the very rare public interviews he ever did, and it was because he was riding the high of like the Trump victory. And that's why he was like coming out and like actually like talking to people for the first time in like decades outside of his weird little circle.
Right. I build myself a home sequestered on an island where nobody can come get at me unless I buzz them in from the front gate. One reason he didn't graduate, he told BuzzFeed News, was politics. He became impressed with the conservative icon of the moment, Barry Goldwater, the Republican senator from Arizona who memorably voted against the Civil Rights Act. I should mention, too, like, I'm pretty sure John McCain, another, Republican senator from Arizona, voted against the creation of Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday. Just wanted to throw that out there, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, the very quick history re Goldwater, and it is relevant and it's important, not just in the context of, like, Regnery, but, like, this whole generation of American conservatism, because, like, Goldwater is seen as this, like, it's just this amazing intellectual force by, like, a huge number of people on the right. He's often claimed,
Roger Stone also says this, that like he read the Conscious, like what was Barry Goldwater's book called, like the Conservative Conscious or something like that. Like he read that as a child, and that was his like eye-opening moment.
Interestingly, another Democratic presidential candidate in recent years was a fan of Goldwater in their youth. Care to make a guess? I
am gonna care to guess. It would have to be somebody that maybe perhaps also eulogized segregationists in the 2000s. Is it perhaps our current president, Joseph Robinette Biden?
I don't know. That
really?
Could very well be the case. But the one I'm talking about is Hillary Clinton. She was
what?
Yeah, she was part of a group called the Goldwater Girls.
Fuck off, dude!
When she was a kid, and that came up in the 2016 primary.
She's the worst.
Anyway, sorry.
Oh God.
Please continue.
All right, I'm gonna fucking shrug that one off for a second. Anyway, so he's saying here, he was like, yeah, I didn't finish school because I really like Barry Gold. Imagine not getting a degree for Barry Goldwater, or any senator for that matter. Anyway, his most memorable effort, he claimed, was a convoluted scheme called Operation Dewdrop, intended to suppress Democratic voters in Philadelphia.
This is so weird.
At the time, he explained, the theory was that Democrats voted less in the rain. I don't know why that would be different for Democrats versus anybody else, but okay, whatever. So on election day, he said he tried to seed rain clouds by using dry ice and a twin-engine airplane. It didn't rain, he recalled, but he burned his fingers from the dry ice canisters, a detail that helps add a ring of authenticity. Obviously, Goldwater lost to Lyndon Johnson. So anyway, going now into his short-lived business ventures here. His grandfather's business was built up in Illinois, and that's where Regnery later returned for decades and raised a family. Bill Regnery seems to have inherited little of his family's business acumen, to say the least. His cousin Fred Myers told BuzzFeed News that Regnery ran the family textile business and nearly ruined it. A court noted that the business was losing money when Regnery was in charge. He had no idea how to run a business and drove it into a very dire situation, Myers recalled. I was put in as president, Myers said, and the thing improved rapidly, and we sold it 5 years later. He was maybe a little bit bitter, even though I had made a lot of money. Alfred Regnery, the son of Henry Regnery, the famous publisher, confirmed that his cousin was ill-suited for a career in business, and as he says, quote, that was the consensus for the family. I love when he says, Regnery here said that the company was already losing money when he had stepped. When I got there, the thing was already losing money. It wasn't me that did anything with my bad business acumen. That was a slander from my own family stabbing me in the back. I assume this is what he sounds like. And he ran it only for 15 months. It got, quote, back in the black within half a year after he left, he said. Success he and a manager he hired, Jim McCrary, attributed to measures taken under Regnery's leadership. Myers, Regnery said, had an axe to grind because he lost a lawsuit Regnery and other family members brought against him. I like he says here, it says, Regnery had a few public accomplishments and published no writings BuzzFeed News could discover, and gave few hints about his support of white nationalism. Asked what he did during this period, he replied via email, the next 30 years were devoted to business and family. I never looked back. And so here's where it kind of like takes a turn. So I'll end my portion here. But my God, again, I think we're not, being too hyperbolic when we read into this. But like the guy reads as a loser. Like the guy reads as like he wasn't particularly well liked. He was sequestered. He was self-sequestered off. And, he definitely, was enshrouded in the bitterness that kind of would, explain in portion definitely an affinity to the kind of far right hatred that definitely takes the lens off of yourself and puts it on other people. Anyway, so Chris, I believe you have a few things to talk about with the Regnery publishing there.
I do. Yeah, I have a bit more about Regnery publishing. I also have a bit more about Human Events, because when I read about that one as well, I just couldn't help but look a little bit further into that one. So yeah, Human Events and Regnery Publishing were both founded by William Regnery II's uncle, Henry Regnery. He founded Human Events in 1944 and Regnery Publishing in 1947. Human Events, by the way, does still exist. It does still exist in digital form. A few things here about them. Here's kind of what they were focused on a bit in the 80s here. It says, in July 1985, Human Events gave qualified support to apartheid South Africa, describing the country as, quote, a pro-Western bulwark that provides more in the way of freedom and wealth to its blacks than the vast majority of black African states.
Whoa.
Human Events also described Nelson Mandela as the main obstacle to peace in South Africa. Quote, while President Botha is moving at a fast and furious pace to end the apartheid system, Mandela remains as adamant a revolutionary as ever. He's still a Marxist, still a man of violence, still a supporter of the communist-run ANC.
Wow. Wow.
And speaking of that, during the 80s, here's a little bit more about one of their biggest fans in the 80s. Human Events was former U.S. President Ronald Reagan's, quote, favorite reading for years. Writes,
No.
Yeah, of course. Writes biographer Richard Reeves, a loyal subscriber since 1961. Reagan said it, quote, helped me to stop being a liberal Democrat, calling it must-reading for conservatives who want to know what is really going on in Washington, D.C. Reagan contributed some articles to Human Events in the 1970s.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, by the way, their current editor-in-chief is Jack Posobiec.
No.
Yeah, as of recently, as of May of this year, they also
Jesus
I
Christ.
kind of was tickled by this as well. They have, I guess they ceased doing this when they switched from like print to digital in 2013, but from 1998 through 2013, they did the Conservative of the Year award. Some highlights: 1998, Ken Starr; 1999, Ronald Reagan; 2000, William Rehnquist, Clarence Thomas, and Antonin Scalia; 2002, John Ashcroft.
There you go. There you go. In 2002, no
In 2002, George Bush, of course. 2001, I skipped that one. 2003, here's an up-and-comer, Roy Moore.
No.
Roy Moore of Alabama in 2003. Yeah, when he was the, I guess, Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. Mike Pence in 2005, another. I mean, they were really early on some of these of these guys.
Yeah.
Rush Limbaugh in 2007. Dick Cheney
bet.
in 2009.
In 2009. Dick Cheney.
Yeah. Scott Walker in 2012. Darrell Issa in 2013.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as Regnery goes, the publishing house that shares William Regnery II's name, and who he not a single one of us could find the first detail about his time at the helm of the publishing company. I think it was in like 1980, and it was only for a few months, like 9 months or less or something like that, and like literally none of us could find anything about his time at the helm of it. But I think we can just assume that much in the same way he failed out of like the family textile business, he like also failed out of the like family anti-Semitism business, I suppose, as well.
That's right.
But some of so Regnery Publishing is this sort of going all the way back to the 40s, this very old publisher of right-wing shit. It's sort of like a big tent publishing house. They've got like thought leaders like Sarah Palin and Josh Hawley, all the way down to like cranks like Jerome Corsi and John O'Neill and people like that.
Oh, wow.
They published William F. Buckley's first book, God and Man, at Yale in 1951, the one he published when he was like 25 years old. That was like about his time in Yale and the, I guess, liberal indoctrination going on there, I suppose.
Nothing's new. Nothing's new.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing's new.
Well, Ross Douthat, he published a book. I can't remember the name of it, but he published a book very much like this. It was like very much in the mold of William F. Buckley's book. They also published during the 1950s. They published Ezra Pound's books, the poet. Ezra Pound, and this is the 1950s, by the way. This is Ezra Pound, who went like full fucking Nazi during World War II and like lived in Italy and like hosted an explicitly pro-fascist radio program in Italy during the 1940s. They also, in the 1950s, published 2 books by Robert Welch. The first was called May God Forgive Us, A Short History of the Communist Takeover of China. Like a very sort of like McCarthy era type book where he's like accusing elements within the like liberal foreign policy sphere of like secretly working against the United States.
Yeah, that was a big conspiracy back then. The whole idea was that like the U.S. had lost China,
right,
as if they ever possessed it.
Yeah,
and not like explicitly the other way around.
Yeah.
They also published Welch's second book in 1954, which was a biography of John Birch that would lay the groundwork for the John Birch Society that Robert Welch himself would found a few years later in 1958. So they published like the John Birch Society foundational texts. A few more of their greatest hits here. In 1996, they published a book called Unlimited Access, an FBI agent inside the Clinton White House, which, among other things, accused Hillary Clinton of hanging crack pipes from the White House Christmas tree.
I believe it. I believe it.
And yeah, they always make these people so much cooler than they are, than they really are with their hatred of them.
Let's smoke crack.
I feel great. All right.
What a terrible smear.
So
Dude, like a baby would think of that. It's so childish.
Fucking grow up. There's like real things to smear her about, and that like there's like, oh, did she put crack? What a fucking idiot. Unless she was she was like, I saw in a gas station once you can get these little roses you can buy for like $1 and can get a few of those. Then I might believe it. To the listener, look it up. I don't know.
Yeah, or DM me. I could tell you all about it. They also publish. Here's a good one, Shane. Here's one for you. They published in 2004 a book called Dereliction of Duty: Eyewitness Account of How Bill Clinton Compromised America's National Security.
Oh, yep.
Written by Robert Buzz Patterson.
That's right, Buzz Lightyear.
Friend of the show.
Yeah, friend of the show. Who I regret that I like DM'd him some shit and he blocked me like immediately as soon as I found out who he was. And I wish I hadn't done that. I wish that I could enjoy his posts. But yeah, he was the one who was like a White House military aide who carried the nuclear football,
named after the character from Toy Story, Buzz Lightyear.
Named after the character.
That's right. Yeah.
They also have a whole. I was looking over their website and like some of the other more current books that they published. They have a whole series of books called the within this type of formatting, the politically incorrect guide to blank. One of them, the one I'm looking at here, is called the politically incorrect guide to the Civil War, which, among other things, according to their own website here, seems to say that if the Civil War had never happened, the Confederacy would have peacefully come around to abolishing slavery a few years after that, and if the Americans might have won World War I sooner if we hadn't killed off all the people who might be generals from the Confederacy from that age, who would have been young men or whatever during the Civil War. So
wow.
Big reach, man. Absurd.
Wow.
I mean, you could say anything hypothetically might have happened,
That's like a Marvel's What If.
It's
like that level of a stretch.
Yeah. Some of their current, looking at their website here, some of their current offerings, some of their new releases here, we have I Can't Breathe: How a Racial Hoax is Killing America by David Horowitz.
No.
Jesus Christ.
Understanding and Loving Your Child with ADHD.
Okay.
Okay. What else do they have? Debunking the 1619 Project.
Yikes.
Obviously the same kind of.
Just
you get the picture.
An industry based on grievance.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really funny too, because one of the other books they publish, and one of the other books they published was Unfit for Command: The Swift Boat Veterans book,
way.
The book that John O'Neill and Jerome Corsi wrote back in 2004 to But it's funny. Speaking of, I was thinking about that when I read, because I didn't realize that they published that. But it got me thinking about John O'Neill and what his entire career, his entire existence has been based on grievance. Basically, he was all the way back. He saw John Kerry. He was recruited in 1971 by the Nixon White House to be the counter to John Kerry. After John Kerry testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or whatever about the Vietnam War, and I guess they saw that and they were like, we need someone on our side to counter the raw charisma of this John Kerry fellows. So they got this. They got John O'Neill to be the right wing John Kerry to go out there, and it's no, Vietnam is actually good, and we should never leave, and defend everything in Cambodia and Laos and everything like that. And then 34 years later, like they fucking dig out this old fossil who's like still burning with resentment over, over John Kerry and get him to publish write this book about the all the swift boat type shit. So some of their other published writers here, we got Ann Coulter, Sarah Palin, Newt Gingrich, Michelle Malkin, David Horowitz, which I already said, Ted Cruz, Mike Pence. They recently published Josh Hawley's book. It's called like The Tyranny of Big Tech or something like that, which like Simon & Schuster was his original publisher, and they dropped him after the riot at the Capitol. But anyway, so in searching for stuff on YouTube, I was like, I did find some interviews with this William Regnery II guy, even though he hasn't done all that many. But I also found this this interview with the current president of Regnery Publishing. His name is Thomas Spence, and they're talking about they're talking about Josh Hawley's book, and of course they're making this big fucking deal out about the tech censorship and all this sort of stuff, and then. But I wanted to play this because I'm glad, Shane, that you brought up how this whole fucking industry is just built on just grievance and just like just basically just imagining a scenario in your mind to get mad about, like whether it's actually happening or not. And like, so I just wanted to play this this clip here for a second.
A lot of people in the conservative publishing community, which is a small community, but there are some notable people in it, are starting to get nervous and starting to notice things, particularly after this weekend. When Amazon shut down Parler by cutting off its web hosting services, it did not take a fevered imagination to realize that they could also, if they wanted to, stop selling our books. They could ban Senator Hawley's book. They could ban all Regnery books, or whatever books they want. Right now, they are a private company. That is their right. But it does show if Amazon won't sell your books, a publisher is in a pickle. We also have. Concerns across my company, like every company these days, depends on big tech services in all kinds of ways. And if they were to pull the plug on us, it would hurt.
Are you concerned? Have there been any indications that Amazon will not sell books that you're publishing?
No.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, I love how also in the middle of that he can't help but like include like, well, they're a private company and they do have the right to do whatever they want to do.
Right. So stick to the ideology. Got to make sure that that's their right to do. I love it. Just dying to be oppressed.
Right.
Dying to be oppressed.
Yeah.
Fucking loser.
So that's Thomas Spence. That's the person currently at the helm of Regnery Publishing, and that's it. That's Regnery Publishing, folks.
Seems right.
Fueled by grievance.
Just completely fabricated grievance. Just a bunch of babies. Jesus Christ. And I love anyway. This isn't about. Whatever, but like I love that they also like hold like masculinity so dear, especially like fucking the fuck is his name? We did the episode with Becca Lewis, Dennis Prager.
Yes.
Like smoking cigars and shit like that.
And all of these guys, like Jerome Corsi and I think John O'Neill, and like so many of these people that I've mentioned, of course, all have like PragerU videos also.
Yes. Yeah. It's part of the same network, again, which is like, and as we'll get into then, speaking about like William Regnery II's particular contributions in this regard, what he goes on to do with his money in his spare time, again, as a sort of constantly mentioned, like the black sheep of the family or what have you, right? is essentially pour money into these like phony make work institutions and publications and stuff to promote like explicit, extremist white nationalist ideas. But it's like, oh, where did he get the idea from this? It's the same thing that his family business is. It's just it's the more extreme version of it, right? It's like putting a respectable face and creating an outlet, a publishing outlet to make, whatever bizarre, insane, right-wing reactionary fucking screed you want to put out, make it look like, oh, this could be an actual book, or this is like a legitimate like train of science, or this is like a reasonable argument, whereas most of it is not, right? It's like,
or like calling it the fucking National Policy Institute, like something just really vanilla and unassuming, and just sounds like any other fucking think tank in DC.
Right. I mean, it's the same with the student group, right? ISI, which he eventually, William Regnery II, and I guess I can kind of start to get into this now. Before I got too much into him, I did want to bring it up because in that BuzzFeed article that you mentioned, Dwight, that I'm going to read from, there's like a few parts later on when he comes out as just like a full-on, Nazi racist, right? as if he hadn't been making that like public for his entire life. But there's a certain point in the 2000s after he starts founding stuff like the National Policy Institute and Charles Martel Society, where like he starts getting booted from all the other quote unquote respectable members of or respectable associations that his family has, and he eventually got kicked off of the board of ISI. And in that article, there's a quote from his cousin Alfred, who talks about like how like like how unpleasant it was to have like a out and out racist as a member of the family and a member on this board. And I figured it would be worth mentioning Alfred in a little bit of detail before getting into William again, because Alfred was also, he was part of the family business. He was the president at Regnery Publishing from 1986 to 2003. And prior to that, he was in the Justice Department under Reagan because he was a lawyer, and he had served in a bunch of different capacities in there. But again, sort of this idea that he was like a respectable conservative, right? Like he was working in the White House, but it also shows how like well connected this whole family was. Just reading quickly from Wikipedia here, here's an interesting thing. This is again about the cousin Alfred. In 1976, Regnery ran for district attorney in Madison, Wisconsin. During that campaign, his wife reported several threatening phone calls. Regnery publicized allegations to the police that his wife had been injured and forced to have sexual acts with men who had broken into their home. During investigation, police found no evidence to substantiate the claims and allegedly discovered a stash of pornography in the Regnery home.
Oh boy.
Something very strange going on there, making up these claims in order to support his political campaign. And then later on in life, this guy, he was a publisher of the American Spectator. And he also, in 1995, he co-founded the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. And then became a chairman of its board in 2014. And there are a host of other Reaganites and well-connected Republicans and stuff on the board of that. So this is like those are like the sides of the family that are like feel like, okay, William is the black sheep, right? This is like the milieu that he's coming out of, which is like the ultimate like rich, well-connected like servants of the right-wing political project in the United States in the latter half of the 20th century. And William himself is just so like, I guess, such a loser on his own that he alienates himself from even like participating in that, and instead goes off the deep end. So let's get into what he got up to and why we're really talking about him today. Okay, so to pick back up with William Regnery II, I'm going to go back to that BuzzFeed article / interview thing that Dwight, you were reading from earlier from 2017 by Am Roston and Joel Anderson, which, covers his kind of biography. And so it'll be useful as a frame as we go throughout, and I'll kind of jump in and out of it to bring up some of the pieces that are mentioned in this article. So kind of picking up almost exactly where you dropped off in his life, right? After like being essentially a failure of the family business for many decades and raising a family and everything, something changes for him at a certain point. So reading from the article here, In 1993, in a hotel conference room in downtown Chicago, he watched a speech in which the Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman declared that the West had won the Cold War. "We have won. The West has prevailed," Regnery recalled the speaker saying. Such confidence seemed false, he said, and sparked in him a surge of outrage. "I looked around and said, I've got to leave this building," he recalled. "I just said, this is wrong, that's wrong." It was that experience, he said, that set him on the course of a total racial segregation. Asked repeatedly how that seemingly ordinary speech could affect him so deeply, Regnery finally wrote in an email, quote, "Against this jubilant optimism, I saw nascent political correctness stifling debate, unrestricted immigration changing the demographics of the country, affirmative action penalizing whites, and open housing curtailing freedom of association," end quote. The change didn't come all at once. During the Clinton years, "I marinated," he said, but he increasingly saw the conservative heritage of his uncle and of authors like William Buckley as a betrayal. They had accommodated political correctness and embraced things such as free markets, military intervention overseas, and support for Israel. So, as he approached 60 years old, having made little mark upon the world, he started collecting people, as he put it, of like mind.
That line is so fucking sad. Like, you're 60 and you've basically done nothing. Especially with all, like, the wealth and privilege and shit.
Right, yeah. And to be clear, like, when we say failure, right, we're talking about, like, in that kind of sense of prestige. Like, he was rich. He was a multimillionaire. He had a family. You know, he had probably a very nice house, you know, a lot of gadgets. And you know, that's retirement age, right?
Yes.
That's when you're looking at, like, okay, how am I going to spend my golden years? And literally with all the wealth and privilege that was afforded him by all of the things that he's fucking mad about, right? What does he decide to do? So, and as he puts it, he starts collecting people, which again speaks to this, like, weird, I don't know, like fucking, like you were putting, Dwight, the voice you were doing was perfect, but just, I'm going to collect all the people together, you know, like.
It's only because of all of these usurpers and people around me holding me back.
Right. So, again, going to the article here, he called up Jared Taylor, founder of the American Renaissance magazine, which regularly publishes stories about black and immigrant crime, and once argued that black people are, quote, more psychopathic than whites. Taylor had already convened conferences of other white nationalists. Yeah, I mean, again, at this point, we're getting deep into white nationalist territory, and there's going to be just, like, a lot of ideas. And, you know, in reading this, there was, like, a lot of this material I read, and I was trying to evaluate going through, like, what am I going to repeat and what not, just because a lot of this is just, like, Nazi propaganda stuff, so bear that in mind as we go through. And there are a few points, even in this article, I was like, you could have given that a little bit more, like, explanation, right? You could have given that a little bit more context. But in any case, Jared Taylor had already convened conferences of other white nationalists. Regnery headed down to Kentucky to see him. He sought out Sam Francis, a one-time Washington Times columnist who went on to become chairman of an anti-immigration organization, and Sam Dixon, the Atlanta-based attorney who made his name defending members of the Ku Klux Klan. He invited them and roughly 10 others in December 1999 to a lavish Gatsby-era Florida resort, the Don Cesar, better known as the Pink Palace for its rose-colored towers and archways. Regnery had prepared a grandiose opening speech titled, quote, "For Our Children's Children." Warning of an ominous future, quote, "Generation by generation, our kind will be winnowed out." He closed with a vision of the North American population carved up along racial, cultural, and social lines. Now, I want to pop out of the article for a second here, because obviously the whole invocation of the children's children, this kind of becomes his, like, founding document, is, like, the thing he lays claim to as being, like, you know, the sort of beginning of his intellectual journey, and the thing that he bases everything else later on is very clearly an allusion to the 14 words, right? It's invoking that same idea, which he did not coin. That was coined by David Lane, who was the leader of the terror organization, the Order, which he was imprisoned along with other members of the group for conspiring to kill and murdering this Jewish radio host in the 1980s. So that guy died in prison.
Jesus.
But this is the legacy that then is being built upon, right? And the reason why I bring that up is, like, it's not even, like, they're not even coming up with this, right? This is coming out of, like, white nationalist gangs and terror groups in the 70s and 80s. And now here in the 90s, it's like an older crop of, like, weird pseudo-intellectuals, pseudo-scientists, and quacks are trying to reappropriate this shit and, again, sort of sanitize it a little bit, mainstream it. So he He led the way, playing a crucial role in the 2001 launch of the Charles Martel Society, which describes itself as the intellectual home of Western nationalism. Of course, Charles Martel is the Frankish general, fought the Umayyad Caliphate in France in the 700s. He was the grandfather of Charlemagne. It's like, this is like a figure that comes up a lot in like white nationalist stuff, right? Because he he was a white man who stood up to the Muslim invaders of Europe. Like, that's the framing of it. So that's what he's naming. This is like the defense of Western civilization. Going back to the article, Regnery never had formal criteria for which groups the organization should fund, he said. He simply knows what he likes. Regnery himself signed the Charles Martel Society's initial tax form and entirely covered the first year's budget of $48,000. People affiliated with the Charles Martel Society instantly clam up about it when asked. Taylor initially said, quote, "I don't know about the Charles Martel Society." Later, when reminded that he is listed on the organization's paperwork as a founding member, he said, "My association with it is so old, I don't think I can talk about it." Richard Spencer, asked about it over lunch, abruptly changed the subject. "Excellent meal," he exclaimed. "It's a secret society," explained Kevin McDonald, the only member who would discuss it. "Only the board is public, as required by law," he said. McDonald, who is a well-known white nationalist academic, writes frequently about Jews and says that they have a desire for the end of Europe as a Christian civilization with its traditional ethnic base. He is a retired professor at California State University at Long Beach. The Charles Martel Society members, he said, are bound by non-disclosure agreements. Quote, "You have to sign a paper saying you will not divulge any information. If you did it, you'd be thwarted by a lawsuit." But one thing that MacDonald was happy to divulge, the group's racist precepts. From the beginning, he said, quote, "We stressed you had to be on board about race, and you have to be on board about Jewish influence." Taylor, he said, is an outlier at the society meetings because he believes Jews are white and should be accepted. Regnery himself insists that the Charles Martel Society is not actually secret, but private and confidential. The society publishes Occidental Observer, a magazine that describes itself as covering white identity, interests, and culture. It also publishes the academic-sounding journal Occidental Quarterly, which featured Regnery's For Our Children's speech in its first issue, and has articles such as, quote, "The Case for Eugenics in a Nutshell," end quote. So 2 things here to pop out. First of all, the whole idea that they're like acting so secretive about it is so like absurd. It's like the fucking meme that has been going around from The Sopranos where Meadow asks Tony, like, "Dad, are you in the mafia?"
Yes.
And he goes, "There is no Charles Martel Society," like
It's offensive.
yeah. It's again, it's like this weird attempt to kind of create this sense of mystery and like, oh, we're like a secret club or whatever. And it's like very self-evident what it's about. It's a group of people, well-connected, well-funded people to come together and promote each other's projects. And like I said, the main thing that it does is publish these different like publications. So the Occidental Quarterly, and then there's another one that's the Occidental Observer, which is more of just like a magazine. But the Occidental Quarterly is made up to look like a academic journal. So you might mistake it. Just by looking at it, it kind of looks like that. I also wanted to quickly, because there wasn't the context here given for this guy, Kevin McDonald, who's briefly mentioned, but McDonald, who is here mentioned just as a retired professor, he was a longtime, quote, evolutionary psychologist and quack, having written, among other things, the Culture of Critique trilogy of books that is just, it's like a 3-volume set where he like gets into like Judaism and the idea is that it's an evolutionary strategy. It's a psychological evolutionary strategy to like usurp other peoples, and that Nazism and National Socialism is a counter evolutionary strategy, right? It's biology. It's just basic biology. And then from Wikipedia, brief quote, MacDonald published a series of 3 articles in the Occidental Quarterly on the alleged similarities between neoconservatism and other movements that he claims are Jewish-dominated. He argues that, quote, taken as a whole, neoconservatism is an excellent illustration of the key traits behind the success of Jewish activism: ethnocentrism, intelligence and wealth, psychological intensity, and aggressiveness. End quote. So, he's like one of those people that's like, oh, the neocons, which later then just under the guise of like the internet culture of the alt-right, they just called them like cucks, right? They were like, oh, those are the cucks. But it's the idea is like, that's how we're going to distinguish ourselves from like the mainstream people of the right who are in power. And in this case in particular, they're talking about like often like the Bush administration and stuff. Like these are like the guys to the right of the Bush administration.
Jesus Christ.
Also, just as a little Easter egg for us, Kevin McDonald is also a big donor to VDare, whose castle me and Chris were staking out earlier
sieging
this
the
summer.
castle.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have a bunch here from the SPLC about the Charles Martel Society. I kind of covered this. Again, there's a lot more details about all the various people who have written for it. It's a lot of, if you study or look at, like, again, sort of pseudoscience, white nationalist writers and stuff, it's just like a laundry list of those guys. McDonald got some like $10,000 award from them. It's a way for them to all these guys pool their money. And in particular, William Regnery II has spent a lot on this. And so after a few years of publishing this stuff under the Charles Martel Society, in 2005, created a separate organization, but intimately linked, as a think tank, which is the National Policy Institute. And so reading just one brief sentence here from the article, NPI started with $596,000, according to its initial tax filings, $380,000 of which came from the Charles Martel Society. Regnery told BuzzFeed News that about half the money for NPI came from him, and that the rest came from matching grants. His very first press release in December 2005 was a call for the deportation of all illegal immigrants. Now, note, I looked into this. Another big source of funds for them was this place called the Pioneer Fund. And just quickly from Wikipedia, to give you a sense of what the Pioneer Fund is, the Pioneer Fund is an American nonprofit foundation established in 1937, quote, to advance the scientific study of hereditary and human differences. The organization has been described as racist and white supremacist in nature, and as a hate group by the SPLC. One of its first projects was to fund the distribution in U.S. churches and schools of a Nazi propaganda film about eugenics.
Yikes!
They also put a bunch of money into the research that went into that book that came out in the 90s, The Bell Curve by Charles Murray, which is like the famous kind of one of the biggest splashes of this entire kind of pseudo-intellectual movement, right? The attempt to quantify and put science-y language in a modern age on racism. Also, interestingly, in their list of the founders of the Pioneer Fund, a whole bunch of just like old school Nazi guys, right, from the United States. One of them is named Frederick Osborne. When I read that in my mind immediately, that's now my backstory for the Green Goblin. But back to the BuzzFeed article.
I think I get that.
So after he creates the National Policy Institute, soon Regnery met a young man named Richard Spencer, who then worked at the American Conservative magazine. Other than coming from a privileged background, Spencer seemed everything Regnery wasn't: academically successful, publicity hungry, and youthful. The two men hit it off. At that time, Regnery, together with his friend Gottfried, the right-wing author, helped set up a group called the Academy of Philosophy and Letters. Again, Chris, as you sort of mentioned, notice like how all of these names sound very neutral from the outside, right? Again, it's an attempt to literally whitewash this stuff. Spencer, too, was an early member, but their obsession with race soon put them at odds with the organization they had helped build. Spurned by the Academy, Spencer, Regnery, and Gottfried established a new group called the Mencken Club. That was the place where the phrase alternative right was first used, according to Regnery, Spencer, and Gottfried. Spencer used it to title a speech by Gottfried, The Decline and Rise of the Alternative Right. In 2010, Regnery asked Spencer to find candidates to lead the organization. Spencer suggested himself. At the time, leading such an explicitly racist organization carried great risk for someone with political ambitions. Quote, I felt he was too accomplished and had too bright a career in the offing to accept a position that would forever brand him with the mark of Cain, Regnery said. I remember spending time...
The mark of Cain, like... From the Cain and Abel, like the fucking Bible?
Yeah. He's saying, if you publicly associate yourself with this, you'll have a scarlet letter and you'll never be able to run for office. It's like, gee, I wonder how you have so much self-reflection about what a deluded racist you are.
Wait, Shane, if I may digress for just a second, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I have to interject this. It's been stewing in my mind all day, and I absolutely have to interject this, because Shane and I've told you about this guy a couple years ago, and at that time he had already deleted his entire internet presence, but there's like a minor character of the alt-right, and I happened upon him again today when I was watching videos to research for this, because he's interviewed in one of the YouTube videos that pops up if you search William Regnery II. He's in it briefly. I think it was by The Atlantic, and they were focusing mainly on Richard Spencer and stuff like that, and the National Policy Institute. He was apparently, this guy was at the National Policy Institute annual meeting where Richard Spencer did like the Heil Trump thing or whatever. So this guy's name is Al Stankard, and I the way I discovered him, it was like years ago. It was 2017, and he like. I was watching the video on YouTube of like Richard Spencer getting punched, because sometimes you just have to just go back and revisit that.
Pick me up.
I was watching that, and I found another video that was recommended that was filmed by this guy Al Stankard, who was there on the street with Richard Spencer when he got punched, and he actually, because he posted a video of him chasing down the guy who punched him, and like it's like, you're the real fascist, and like yelling that shit at him, and it
that kid's a fucking national hero, by the way.
Yeah. But then it like I went down this whole rabbit hole of like his YouTube account, and it really, I don't know, the way I described it to myself at the time was like, it was like, you know, those like Star Wars expanded universe novels where like they'll take like some person who appears on screen for like a second in the cantina and then give them like a whole backstory and a whole story. That's what like discovering this Al Stankard guy was like, because he actually when I watched the video now of Richard Spencer getting punched, you can see him in it for a second. He's in it for a split second. And then I found his whole YouTube page where he's a real weirdo, and he's like obviously this rich kid who like hitchhikes around and like travels the world and like hitchhikes across like India and like Europe and places. Like he's obviously not employed and like living off some sort of independent wealth or whatever. And he got interviewed by Vice or whatever. Like remember like in like 2016, 2017 when people first started talking about Richard Spencer, like when everybody was doing like an article that was like, meet the the hip young people
Nazi.
The Nazi who hate Jews and they have an undercut and they whatever. But they did an article like that about him where like they described him as like the hipster alt-right or something like that.
Right.
So for a while I followed all this stuff on YouTube, and because he's a real fucking weirdo, and he had this like video called like the racist Pepe dance, and it was about how like interpretive dance is going to save the white race or something like that. Like a real freak and a weirdo, and eventually he deleted his entire online presence and years ago, and I haven't been able to find any trace of him until today. I googled him again after I saw him featured in that video on YouTube, and he apparently wrote an op-ed for Russia Today back in May. And the title of it is "My alt-right anti-rich views made me unemployable. Now I'm ghostwriting college papers for rich lefty kids. What an irony." What? so this is him, this is just him lamenting, hey, I published videos of myself saying the N-word under my full, very unique name on the internet, and now woe is me. I can't, nobody wants to hire me.
Jesus Christ.
All of the questions about my very dubious career as an online Nazi could be answered by my T-shirt. So that is the exact kind of framing that it's being put here, and that was what Regnery was worried about with Richard Spencer. Like, oh God, if we brandish him like this, then we'll never be able to go any farther with him. And ultimately, like, obviously Spencer takes the job, and the difference between the guy you just brought up and Spencer, right, is Spencer happened to meet a rich guy. That's the thing. That's what makes this different and unique. Like, the reason why we know who Richard Spencer is, the reason why that he got punched, the reason why that there were all these glamour articles about him has nothing to do with Spencer's own capabilities, even as like a speaker or whatever. It is entirely based on the fact that he happened in these small circles to run into this like heir of publishing and textile thing who himself lacked any charisma to the point that he was charmed by a guy who just like wasn't like saying the N-word every second. He was like, wow, we could really make a go of this. So anyway, let's see, back to this. Right. So then when Spencer took the job, and then in a speech last year, so that would mean in 2016, Regnery said that putting Spencer in charge of NPI, quote, secured my place in history, Which again is like something would be said in that voice you were doing, Dwight.
Finally, I've been able to get all the usurpers and fakers and liars. 60 years ago, I was sitting in a home in Philadelphia. Now look at lonely and ignored. No one would come over for my birthday party. And now I'm on top. Rise, Lord Spencer. Fulfill your destiny. By my side, we together will later be arrested in Hungary. Do you want to kill me?
I certainly would like to.
Okay.
Do you want to get punched in Washington, D.C. Northwest?
Yes, my master.
Do you want to be publicly humiliated at L'Enfant Plaza?
I would certainly like to.
As Spencer's going down, when he gets hit in his head, he's just thinking, I'll try spinning. That's a good trick. Okay, all right. Let me get back. Let me get back to this because there's a couple more details I want to hit before we totally break down. Okay. Returning to the article here. Indeed, Spencer got the group off to an energetic start. He set up a website called alternativeright.com and launched radixjournal.com, where authors have recently argued that, quote, this planet, mankind, and European man would all be better off with less and better humans, and pondered whether the reboot of Gilmore Girls depicts, quote, the death of white America.
What's the conclusion?
Oh, it doesn't mention here.
Okay.
I guess you'll have to go and find out for yourself. But again, it's so interesting because it's like the scope and ambition of these ideas is like the world is at stake. But if you're creating a publishing empire and you have like a website or a blog and you need to crank out content every fucking day, what's going on in the news? There's a new Ghostbusters movie. What the fuck?
Right.
What do you have to talk about? Anyway. Within a year, NPI held a press conference at the National Press Club on the subject of, quote, the majority strategy, why the GOP must win white America for victory in 2012. Regnery said he can't remember how much money is contributed to the movement, and there is no way for others to track all his personal donations to political groups. But those that he made through family charities and other tax-exempt organizations that he controls or influences total $580,000 since 2001. This is written in 2017. And so it gets into now, it makes comparisons to obviously like other big political donors, the Kochs and, or like on the other side, like Soros, which he drew that connection. He's like, I haven't spent as much money as the Koch brothers or Soros Inc., as he calls it. But, I have had a much better return on investment for the money that I have put in. So it's probably somewhere between, it's $500,000 on paper. It's probably more than that. So somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million of his personal fortune, he's sunk into these projects. So then, basically where the rest of this goes, and then talking about his own life, is even after putting all that together and getting this like fresh face, hey, we got a new guy, we could put together this stuff, nothing still materializes out of it. And he starts to get into a slump and he gets pretty depressed that like, oh, maybe after all, I still am a failure. and I haven't done anything, even if after I've spent a fucking $500,000 on this shit, nothing happened. And the big blow to his ego, which again is very funny and I just hinted at, is that in 2014, the National Policy Institute, and specifically Spencer and Regnery, attempted to organize, quote, a European identitarian conference in Hungary in 2014.
Yikes.
And the idea was to bring together all these Nazis from the US and all these, Nazis in Europe or whatever to come and meet in Hungary. And when the authorities found out about it, he was arrested at the airport the second he got off the plane. And then Spencer, who crossed into the country by land, it's unclear why, but he tried to enter Hungary over land, and he was also arrested, and they were both deported. And they were like detained for like a day or two in jail and then deported. And this was like a really low moment for him because he was like, "Oh, I'm being treated like a common criminal," and it's like, "Buddy, you are." like, like I don't know what to tell you. And I think the blow is also, it's like even like Viktor Orban doesn't like us, and Viktor Orban made a speech where he's like, "We're not going to tolerate like Nazis." So if like Viktor Orban is calling you like a fucking weirdo Nazi, clearly your movement doesn't have any legs. Until of course Trump. And there's a lot of details in here, and obviously I'm gonna just kind of brush over them very quickly because I think the story is very familiar to all of us. You know, it's like 2015, Trump launches his campaign. You know, the very first speech, Mexicans are rapists and criminals and all of that kind of stuff. Right. And so the people at MPI and other white nationalist groups immediately see this as an inroad, right? Like this could be somebody who's like speaking to us, and so they ride the quote unquote Trump train, and this is then where the confluence and the emergence of the alt-right as a thing kind of outside of this particular weird group of people makes a big splash. It becomes a big element of internet culture, a whole variety of weird internet grifters, like Mike Cernovich and, you know, all the other cast of characters that we know kind of fucking throw their hat in the ring here. Obviously Breitbart as well, and then, you know, somebody like Alex Jones. Like it ends up becoming a big tent for anybody who's like more extreme than whatever traditional neoconservatism, which again is already the thing that like started the war on terror, and it's like literally like a fucking fascist empire, international empire, you know, like a militarized like thing. You know, it's like it's essentially like the out and out like Nazi crew. You know, that they ride their crest. And just to wrap us up here, because that's sort of where the article then ends, because this was written in the summer of 2017, and interestingly, it was published right before the Unite the Right rally, which is sort of the high watermark of this particular moment and movement. And so I'm going to read from the SPLC biography that I think, Dwight, you may have read a bit from.
Yeah.
A profile of him. And just the last few paragraphs kind of sum up the remainder of his life very nicely. So, reading from that, in 2017, members of the alt-right believed their political future to be bright. They successfully garnered a massive amount of press coverage. A man they considered a fellow traveler was in the White House, and a deep institutional infrastructure that could propel their movement was already in place, thanks in enormous part to Regnery. But their coalition began to break down after the deadly Charlottesville, Virginia Unite the Right rally in August. The rally, which brought together hundreds of white power activists, was organized in part by Spencer. It ended with James Alex Fields Jr., a 22-year-old white supremacist from Ohio, murdering anti-racist activist Heather Heir when he drove his car through a crowd of counter-protesters. In the wake of the rally, the alt-right coalition quickly descended into infighting over political strategy. Spencer continued an ill-conceived college speaking tour, which drew massive protests, created exorbitant security costs for universities, and brought violence. After Spencer spoke at the University of Florida in October 2017, 3 of his supporters were arrested for attempted murder for shooting at counter-protesters. After an appearance at Michigan State, where Spencer was barely audible over the heckling crowd and supporters clashed with protesters outside the venue, Spencer ended his tour, declaring, quote, "Antifa is winning." Lawyers with the nonprofit Integrity First for America named Spencer in a civil suit on behalf of the people injured at the Unite the Right rally. His lawyer withdrew from the case in June 2020, stating that Spencer owed him a significant amount of money and was being uncooperative. Spencer, who once inspired confidence in Regnery, eventually drove NPI into disarray. Evan McLaren, a longtime Spencer ally, resigned as NPI's executive director in 2018 and was never replaced. By early 2020, the IRS listed the organization's tax-exempt status as revoked. Court filings sent to the organization's address were returned as undeliverable. So their offices were just shuttered. Then, in May 2021, a judge ordered NPI to pay $2.4 million to an Ohio man injured at the Unite the Right rally for his physical and emotional suffering. While Spencer continues to operate Radix and Washington Summit Publishers, NPI's website is no longer active. Regnery died July 2nd, 2021. He was 80 years old. So that was his legacy. After all of that, you know, putting it together and thinking like, hey, maybe we're on the upswing now. You know, all of the things that are mentioned here, like we've got the attention we want, we've got like a momentum or whatever. It all just quickly falls apart. His little like darling boy that he appointed runs the fucking thing totally into the ground. They're suddenly liable, and I was reading elsewhere that $2.4 million price tag, like nobody knows who's going to pay it, because at one that was announced, you know, Regnery, he died of cancer.
Yes.
And he had been sick with cancer for a long time. Clearly, just like in the last couple of years, just totally fell apart personally. He's probably stopped writing those checks, not even out of like, having a change of heart or whatever, but simply because, he was like too sick. He was busy with his own medical bills. And it wasn't like he was like a bottomless pit of money either. He was only, but he was a multimillionaire, right? So, that amount of money that he gave over that 10-year period was a substantial portion of his fortune that he had inherited, essentially. And then, again, speaking to the kind of secrecy and stuff about him, the only, like, things that gave many details about him besides, like, all these other obituaries written in the general press, there was an obituary written in the Occidental Observer for their erstwhile founder. I'm not going to read that. There's just so you know, in his own fucking obituary, there's a whole section on Zimbabwe, so they can see a sense of what the priorities of people are talking about when it comes to him dying. And but what I did find is because he was living at this point for the last couple of years in what is the name of the place? It's a place in Florida. Hold on.
Boca Grande, right?
Yeah, Boca Grande, and it was like a little island in West Florida,
right?
And apparently there were like, the average house was like $1.5 million. All these like mansions of essentially like, it seemed to be like the collecting place for the failsons of the super rich, right? Like people who are not wealthy enough to live in the Hamptons or in like somewhere else. It's essentially like the step above like the Villages or whatever in Florida. Sort of gated community thing. I found in the Boca Beacon, there was an obituary on July 16th that said, I guess right before he died, he converted to Catholicism. And so he died a Catholic. I guess he was really scared to confront the great beyond. And he got confirmed as a Catholic right before he died. And the family said, please, make a donation to the local church and not, I guess, the National Policy Institute's Defense Fund, which clearly needs cash. So after all of that, he died, sad and alone, forgotten by his own people. Fuck him.
Yeah.
And he himself too. I mean, we didn't get into it, and again, I don't want to speak to their character because it's hard to find. But he had a shitload of kids and grandkids. He's got a whole extended family who's there now to divvy up his wealth or whatever's left of it that wasn't spent on like fucking rare Pepe memes in the fury of 2017.
Jesus Christ.
They're not memes, they're NFTs, okay?
Yeah.
So who knows? I mean, obviously the rest of his sort of contemporaries, peer level family members who are presumably also all dead by now. They all hated him and they thought he was a great embarrassment. There is a line here that I didn't read in that BuzzFeed article where it talks about his dad like hated him openly and would tell him to just like get out of the office whenever he brought up ideas, including a whites only dating site. His dad was like, get the fuck out of here.
I don't know where I went wrong with that boy.
Yeah. But again, you could see it even being called like, the black sheep or whatever, reiterated over and over again. Like he wasn't that far off from the politics of the rest of his family. He had just taken that extra step in being explicit. And the thing that distinguishes all of his weird little publishing empires of creating, like a respectable academic looking front for out and out Nazism is really just one step removed from what Regnery Publishing is.
Yeah. This guy was just, he was, one degree of separation away from like William F. Buckley, right? Because William F. Buckley was.
Well, yeah. I mean, they published William F. Buckley. I mean, they published his first book. I mean, he was always the one who was the thinking man's conservative, the respectable conservative. He's not a fucking some yokel. He went to Yale, goddammit.
William F. Buckley, simultaneously the world's smallest mouth and biggest mouth, both in the same person.
He can unhinge his jaw like a fucking snake.
Yes. God, I hate that guy.
You ever see Best of Enemies?
Yeah.
That's great. That's a great documentary about his debates with Vidal.
Gore Vidal, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like legacy, right, there's the immediate way and the way that he's been covered in a lot of these like kind of mainstream obits, right, is like, again, sort of the framing of like, he died having laid the seeds for this, but now, that movement and the things that he put his money to collapsed. And while that's true in terms of the explicit things of like, the National Policy Institute he set up is almost certainly just going to be defunct and collapse. Who knows about the Charles Martel Society, if they're still going to have their secret little clubhouse meetings or whatever.
Right.
But the thing that he's the part of the larger project of is not going away. It didn't go away with with Trump losing the election, right? Like, it's very much like he is one of many like direct contributors to the rise in like incredibly extremist viewpoints on the right being normalized and mainstreamed, and the political violence that ensues. That is part of that project. I mean, one of the things that is brought up in a number of the pieces and things I read about them is that all these guys that put on this like pseudoscientific, like nice friendly front about white nationalist ideas, they always talk about like the idea of creating an ethno-state or like, little cordoned off like segregated communities or whatever. And when asked like, how do you get there, right? I think Richard Spencer once very like cheekily said like peaceful ethnic cleansing, and it's like, no, what you're talking about is genocide. That's what you want to do. That's like explicitly what the project is. But I'm going to talk around it. I'm not going to say like we should do that necessarily. Although again, then even when they're riding their high at the Trump victory, he's like Sig Heiling. Or he made the connection too during that speech. He said, the lying fake news media, or if you should say it in the original German, Lügenpresse.
Yeah.
Which was a Nazi propaganda line. The lying press, right? Like, it's an explicit like connection to that. And while certain figures may be on the out or certain labels or whatever, don't sustain themselves, the movement itself is very much alive thanks to the help of like rich aging failsons like this guy.
Yes.
That's what his legacy is.
I have to say, just like almost like on an emotional level, like I very much recall feeling in 2017, both with Trump, but also like, like you were talking about, Shane, like the larger kind of neo-Nazi and broadly fascist trends that were emboldening themselves, and especially like with the Unite the Right rally too. Like, I remember feeling, for a lot of personal reasons, just like super fucking terrified and anxious, and I was like what's the contingency plan? Like, are we gonna fucking end up in camps? Like, how bad is this gonna get? And especially with like seeing the likes of Richard Spencer, where like with these kind of like pseudo intellectual bullshit kind of like buttoned up fascism, where it's normalized, and especially like in the fucking whatever you'd call the corporate media, the liberal media, whatever, like just sanitizing him and making him be like, hey, this guy's got a cool haircut, hey, he's actually presentable, this is a kind of guy that I might see in a bar on a Friday night or something like that. I'd write an article about him.
Oh, that's interesting.
Not me. I might see him in a bar, and if I do, I know what to do. But it's like, the point is that they I just remember the feeling of like terror. Like this is happening, and it has slowed for a lot of reasons. But like, I think about like the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, or like some of the shootings that happened in Texas. Those explicitly like white nationalist. Like, what about the fucking like insane plot to kidnap Governor? What was her name for the governor of Michigan?
Gretchen Whitmer.
Yeah, and I'm just like, again, like all these emboldened kind of like terror cells that were ready. They're just like, yeah. I get this. And again, like the fact that a lot of this, emboldening of explicitly white nationalist rhetoric is coming from a fucking failson nobody guy that happens to have like a few $1,000,000 just shows to you like how much of a return on investment that they can get with like with like a regular like with like a a relatively ragtag sort of team of like really nobodies, really losers.
Yeah.
And how quickly like there any little bit of resistance, whether that be from a fist or whatever, they fall apart and crumble. But if nobody makes that takes that step to push them so that they do fall apart and crumble, like how powerful they seem at the time. And that is a terrifying fucking feeling. And I remember that very, very explicitly, especially, in that rise in 2017.
And I mean, again, too, with the Trump being the kind of like focal avatar that movement was able to gather around, right? Like, it shows that, because Trump, like, fundamentally, aside from being like personally racist and kind of like a, just like a man who gravitates towards like cruelty. Like,
yes.
he doesn't have any political project. He doesn't give a shit, right? Which is why he also then buckled immediately to the right-wing establishment, and they realized, like, oh, if we can do that, if he'll do that, then sure, we'll use these people. Absolutely, we'll use these people to gain power, which is exactly how, like, fucking Nazis took over, in Central Europe in the 20s and 30s, right? It's like the wealthy, at first it's again, oh, he's the black sheep of the family. Oh, he's a little weird. Oh, I don't really like his ideas. Oh, I don't like the way he talks, whatever. Hey, wait, suddenly if we can use these guys to win political victories and still get those tax cuts, fuck it. Let's go.
Right.
And now it's not even a question of like whatever, the National Policy Institute. It's like Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like that's where the project has gone, where like now so many of those ideas are just on like fucking national TV.
Yes.
It's not just in some obscure little magazine. And Carlson, again, when we did the episode on him, right? Or even somebody like Dennis Prager, who we also did the episode on, right? Like, what do? They serve to kind of sanitize and whitewash some of the more extreme language, create some new fanciful ways to put it. And if I wear a fucking bow tie and I look incredulous on camera, then maybe somehow it'll seem like these ideas, that's the face. It'll seem like these are palatable ideas. These are acceptable ideas. These are ideas now you can say in polite society. Hey, Josh Hawley, your book deal got dropped because you were part of like an illegal fucking quasi-insurrection or whatever. But don't worry, we'll still publish your book over here.
Exactly.
We're still here. We'll make sure that gets out. We'll make sure that gets on the fucking bestseller list or whatever. We'll give you the money for that.
To your point about Trump too, like, I'm sure, like you said, like, Trump didn't have any of these like kind of larger projects in mind. Like, that's just not what he did. I mean, but he did understand, like, hey, there's a material benefit to my class if I, can at least harness these grievances and this hatred and, and use it and weaponize it. I'm sure, like, when Steve Bannon and, fucking Sebastian Gorka were in the White House and they started talking about things like, we're going to finally defeat the Moors or whatever. Like, Trump was just like, whatever, dude, I don't even know what that means.
There was one thing, speaking of Gorka, because I was reminded of him because Regnery and Spencer got arrested in Hungary. There was also an arrest warrant out for Sebastian Gorka.
Yeah, that ruled.
in Hungary. Well, it was at the White House, but I remember reading when he eventually left, because he was like his position was so vague. It was like, counterterrorism expert or something.
Gorka in the White House?
Yeah. And
senior advisor of whatever the fuck.
And he there was one thing I read where like he would interject in meetings and say shit like if they were asking, like if they were like trying to evaluate like how to approach like a policy position, Gorka would say shit like what would Napoleon do? It's just like the most like, like I'm
afraid.
I'm playing Risk at home in my mansion, with a computer because my friends won't come over anymore. Like that's like, again, it's the same. It's like this weird lofty stuff. But the reason why those guys get into that position of power, it's not because of their own merit. It's not because they've even figured out a clever way to game the system. It's because they have benefactors. It's because they have sponsors who put money behind this,
exactly.
Right? Why are there Dennis Prager ads everywhere on YouTube, right? The money goes into it. That's why.
Yes.
And that's, that's what we do on this show, besides just like talking about like some horrible Nazis, which, I'm always down to do. But it's like, it's looking at like the material reasons, like why does this exist, right? It doesn't exist in a vacuum. And like Chris, the guy you were mentioning, right? Like there's like a million cranks. Like you go anywhere. There's like a fucking million cranks who have any weird theories about whatever. The ones who are like, the reason you hear about is somebody said, give that guy a show.
Yes.
The guy, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but I was thinking about this today because the guy, I looked him up to it because I forgot what his name was. His name was Harold von Braunhut. He was.
There's no way that's real.
He was the guy
Chris,
who.
You are shitting me.
Marketed brine shrimp as sea monkeys. He was like the guy who he sold sea monkeys and he sold X-ray specs and all that, like, you know, like bullshit from like, you know, that you clip out of the back of a comic book and like and send in and like it came to light in like the late 80s, early 90s was that he was like funneling money to the Aryan nations and like buying guns for like this KKK group in Ohio. He was like explicitly like not just funding but arming this Nazi shit. Pretty wild stuff.
Oh God. Yep, that's pretty fucking bleak. And you know, despite the fact that he's dead, you know, thank goodness, whatever. But you know, I'm sure that there's somebody else that's here to fill the void, and you know, it's going to be a, you know, who, you know, here's a question: like, who's the millennial, you know, failson heir that is, you know, sitting on a pile of cash, sitting on a nest egg, and they're like, you know what? I've got a fucking grievance. Nobody likes me, and I'm going to continue to fund this. Right, that he's looking for the next fucking Richard Spencer or whatever the hell, you know, next you know, explicitly white nationalist venture is going to be to market that. And I'm sure too,
Al Stankard, he's unemployed. He could use the gig. Yeah.
Right. Again, too, like, you know, I know that we live in a gerontocracy, and a lot of the, like, you know, more just right leaning instead of just like far right leaning kind of people in our government, like Mitch McConnell or whatever, is always like, you know, saying things to donors about like, hey, you want to stop socialism? You got to keep donating to me. And there just exists like this larger apparatus around him and around like, you know, the white nationalist interests that are just going to continue to fund this. And I wonder what that next iteration is going to look like, because it's going to happen, right? These fucking fossils are going to die out, and we're going to be left with, you know, the fucking psycho millennial versions of them.
Yeah.
Brutal.
TikTok nationalism. That'll be the next one.
Oh, dude, I made a like a conservative TikTok group, a conservative TikTok user.
And you're saying this publicly.
No. Like,
you're revealing information about
yes.
this.
Yeah, I don't publish anything. I'm just like, I'm trying to train the algorithm to like show me the fucking dirt. Like, I want to see the bad shit. Like, you know. So like, I'm trying to channel Chris.
I got some shit you can follow.
Good.
Yeah.
So. And it's like, it's tough because like, even just like, you know, if I accidentally stumble on something that's like, you know, of left leaning or something, I like just put more eye time on it. And so like, it's hard for me to like train the algorithm to be like, no, I don't want that shit. I want to have like the MAGA chuds, or like, you know, the conservative, like, you know, country music weddings and shit. That's just like hideous to watch.
Well, I hope that works out for you.
Yeah, I'll let you know if I'll send you anything. If I find
I hope you find what you're looking for.
I don't know why I would need to do this to myself. Like, I have plenty of fucking things that are causing me fucking agita, but whatever.
You give me so much shit about how you don't have time to watch fucking Spider-Man.
Listen, what I do in my remaining 25 minutes of consciousness before I go to bed is my business, damn it.
All right.
That's what I'm doing.
All right. Well, William Regnery II, we don't miss you.
Glad you're gone, you fucking fascist prick. Fuck you. Hope you're burning in hell, prick.
He looks like shit too. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. But there's only a few pictures of him, like and particularly in that BuzzFeed article, and it's like him like shopping or whatever in Florida. And he's just like a pathetic.
There's
saddle.
one clip of. Have you actually heard his voice? There's this one clip of him talking in one of those videos I watched on YouTube, and he's just got this very like I'm not a racist. I'm a tribalist. I call myself a tribalist.
Jesus
very
Christ.
like you know.
Glad you're dead, and hope there's maggots crawling through your fucking face.
Yeah, he has very Mr. Burns vibes to him as an old man.
Sure. Yeah. That scans.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
We've done enough. Goodbye. Stay cool.
The world is riddled with maggots. The maggots are getting fat. They're making a tasty meal of all the bosses and bureaucrats. They're taking over the boardrooms and they're fat and full of pride. And they all came out of the woodwork on the day the Nazi died. So if you meet with these historians, I'll tell you what to say. Tell them that the Nazis never really went away. They're out there burning houses down and peddling racist lies.